That night, at one of Chicago's most expensive restaurants, a woman walked in wearing a garish wig, heavy clown-like makeup, and an attitude sharp enough to clear the room. She chewed loudly, spoke in clipped, dismissive sentences, and behaved as though she was actively trying to ruin the evening. Because she was. Victoria Hale, CEO of a $500 million tech company, had disguised herself as someone impossible to love just to make one man walk away. But Adrian Cole didn't walk away. He sat across from her, calm and unbothered, and started paying attention to exactly the wrong things. Victoria Hale had a rule she never broke: no blind dates. She had held that rule for 3 years, and in those 3 years, she had built her company from a 40-person startup into one of Chicago's most watched tech firms. She had no patience for small talk, less patience from men who looked at her resume before they looked at her face, and absolutely zero interest in sitting across a dinner table from someone her mother had vetted through a mutual connection. The rule was simple. The rule was clean. Then her mother called on a Thursday afternoon and used the one argument Victoria had no defense against: family obligation, and the rule was gone. She didn't know much about the man. His name was Adrian Cole, a friend of a friend, someone described as stable and serious, which in her family's language meant he had money and wasn't embarrassing at events. Victoria didn't bother researching him. She had been to enough of these dinners to know they all ended the same way. The man spent the first 20 minutes pretending to be interested in her opinions, then spent the rest of the evening steering the conversation toward her company's valuation. She knew the pattern. She was tired of the pattern. So the night before the dinner, standing in her bathroom with a glass of wine she hadn't touched, Victoria made a decision. She wasn't going to cancel. Canceling would start a conversation she didn't want to have. Instead, she was going to make him leave. She was going to walk in as someone so completely off-putting that the man would find a polite excuse within 30 minutes and disappear, and she would go home, order takeout, and never hear about it again. It was efficient. It was controlled. It was, she told herself, the rational solution. The wig came from a costume shop 3 blocks from her apartment. It was bright copper red, badly layered, and sat slightly off-center no matter how she adjusted it. The makeup took her 45 minutes to get wrong, on purpose: too much foundation eyeliner drawn heavier than it needed to be, lipstick, a shade of dark plum that clashed with everything. She wore a dress that was technically fine, but styled in a way that read as trying too hard. When she looked in the mirror, she didn't recognize herself, which was exactly the point. She took a cab to the restaurant instead of her usual car service, because showing up in a company vehicle would have undone the entire effect before she walked through the door. Maison Verlaine was the kind of restaurant where the lighting was designed to make everyone look like they belonged there. White tablecloths, low music servers, who moved like they had been trained never to rush. Victoria had eaten there before at real dinners in her real clothes. Walking in that night felt like wearing a costume inside a painting she had once posed for. The hostess gave her a look that lasted half a second too long before leading her to the table. Adrian Cole was already seated. He stood when she approached, which she noted without reacting to. He was taller than she expected, dressed simply a dark jacket. No tie, the kind of understated that either meant he didn't care, or that he cared in a way that had nothing to prove. He had a calm face, not handsome in the way that announced itself, but the kind of face that would stay in your memory longer than a prettier one. Victoria sat down across from him, dropped her bag loudly on the chair beside her, and picked up the menu without saying hello. Adrian sat back down and looked at her without saying anything either. He didn't fill the silence with a compliment or a nervous comment about the restaurant. He just waited the way someone waits when they are genuinely comfortable and not performing comfort. Victoria found that mildly irritating, so she leaned into the performance harder. She ordered for herself, without asking if he was ready, spoke to the server in a tone that was several degrees too sharp, and made a comment about the breadbasket that was designed to land badly. Adrian watched all of this. He didn't flinch, didn't straighten in his seat the way men did when they were deciding whether to stay or start formulating their exit. He just picked up his own menu and read it like she hadn't said anything at all. "You're quieter than I expected," Victoria said, making it sound like an insult. Adrian looked up from the menu. "You're louder than I expected," he said, and his tone carried nothing hostile in it, just an observation stated the same way he might have noted the weather. Victoria blinked. That was not the response she had scripted in her head. She had prepared for discomfort, for polite tension, for the gradual building of a social awkwardness that would make leaving feel like relief. She had not prepared for someone who seemed genuinely unbothered. She chewed her bread loudly, talked over the ambient music when she spoke, and at one point made a dismissive remark about freelance work that was pointed enough that most men would have taken it personally. Adrian didn't take it personally. He answered her directly, said that he liked the independence of his work, and then asked her a question about hers, not about her company's revenue or its market position, but about what problem she had originally set out to solve when she started it. Victoria opened her mouth to deflect the way she always deflected that question in interviews, and then stopped. No one had ever asked her that in a first conversation. They asked how big her team was, how she had funded the first round, whether she was planning to go public. They asked about the company as a financial object. Adrian had asked about the reason she built it, which was a different question entirely, and one she hadn't thought about in a long time. She gave him a short, guarded answer. He listened without interrupting, without the nodding that people did when they were waiting for their turn to speak. When she finished, he said, "That's actually a hard problem to solve," in a way that meant he had heard what she said and thought about it for a moment before responding. Victoria put her fork down. Something was not going the way it was supposed to go. The dinner stretched past the 30-minute window she had mentally budgeted. Adrian didn't perform interest. He either was interested or he wasn't, and right now he appeared to be. He talked when he had something to say, and didn't fill the spaces with noise. He didn't ask about her family, didn't try to establish how his world connected to hers, didn't position himself. He was just there, across the table present, in a way that Victoria was not accustomed to in these situations. By the time the main course arrived, she was still in the costume, still technically running the same plan, but she had stopped enjoying it. Somewhere between his first response and his second, the performance had started to feel less like a strategy and more like a wall she had built between herself and something she couldn't quite name yet. Adrian Cole had not walked away, and for the first time in longer than she could clearly remember, Victoria Hale wasn't sure she wanted him to. The dinner ended without the outcome Victoria had planned. Adrian didn't excuse himself early. He didn't manufacture a phone call or check his watch with the practiced subtlety of someone counting down to an exit. He stayed through dessert, which he didn't order, but sat through while she picked at hers. And when the check came, he reached for it in a way that wasn't a performance. No glance to see if she would protest. No theatrical gesture. He just paid it. They walked out of Maison Verlaine at 9:15, and he held the door open for her, the same way he had held it when she arrived, which was to say, simply without commentary. Outside on the sidewalk, the October air was cold enough to make the separation feel natural. Victoria had her cab already mentally summoned. She was ready to end the night on her terms, to walk away with the evening classified as a failed experiment she could quietly forget. Adrian looked at her with the same unreadable steadiness he'd had all night, and said, "I'd like to do this again sometime, if you want to." Not framed as a question exactly, but leaving room for the answer to be no. Victoria said she'd think about it, which was the most honest thing she had said all evening, and got in the cab. She spent the ride home trying to locate the feeling that the evening had gone wrong. It had gone wrong. She was certain of that. The plan had not worked. Adrian had not left. By that measure, the night was a failure, and yet when she got home and stood again in her bathroom removing the wig, and washing off the heavy makeup layer by layer, she could not find anything that felt like relief. She felt something closer to the particular unease of a question you didn't know you were asking until someone almost answered it. She agreed to see him again. She told herself it was curiosity, which was close enough to true that she didn't examine it further. She showed up the second time without the wig, without the theatrical makeup and clothes that were simply hers. And when Adrian opened the door of the coffee shop he'd suggested, there was no flicker of surprise on his face. He looked at her, the way someone looks at a room they've entered before. Recognized. Comfortable. Victoria found that more unsettling than any reaction would have been. She still wasn't herself with him. She kept the walls up, kept her answers shorter than they needed to be, let long stretches of quiet sit between them without trying to fill them. Part of her was still running the original logic, the more difficult she made. This the faster it would end. But Adrian had a way of treating difficulty as neutral information rather than a problem. When she was sharp, he didn't soften or retreat. He just responded to exactly what she'd said without adding anything to it. When she was evasive, he didn't push. He seemed to have a precise sense of where the line was between interest and pressure, and he never crossed it. What confused her most was what he didn't do. He didn't ask about her company after that first dinner. He didn't reference it, didn't angle toward it, didn't make comments that were designed to let her know he was aware of what she was worth. In her experience, that awareness always surfaced, sometimes subtly, sometimes with embarrassing directness, but always eventually. With Adrian, it simply didn't. He talked about a building he was designing on the north side, described the problem of a client who kept changing the load-bearing specifications after the plans were finalized, and the way he talked about it made clear he found the work genuinely interesting, not as a topic of